Hello and welcome back. For those of you who joined us for the first session today, I am so excited. This is the final session of the Town Hall Summit. Sadly for me, because I've enjoyed it so much over the last 2 days. But it's the final day and the final session, and we're ending with purpose-driven leadership. I think it is such, given the crisis and everything that we're experiencing, operating with purpose and thinking about the importance of things like diversity and inclusion, corporate social responsibility, corporate social responsibility. I'm getting ahead of myself there. A lot of words I have to remember. Learning and development as transformation strategies for how we survive through this crisis. It's a real opportunity for business to think about the things that are important. And so purpose is at the center of all of the folks here in a very, very, very poignant way, all of whom I've known for a very long time. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce them. And excited to have you all, and I'm really grateful that you could join us today. I'm starting in alphabetical order. You can go and read the more full bios on our website, www.thetownhallsummit.com. I'm only going to give you a little bit so we can talk. But Stephen D'Souza is joining us. Stephen is the Global Head of Executive Development at Philip Morris International. He was the founder of Deep Learning Limited, a global executive education consultancy, associate professor at IE Business School, and author of one of the very first books that I ever saw in the UK around celebrating people of color and their accomplishment made in Britain, which I still have, Stephen. I still have that book. It was several years ago. I still have that book. You were a pioneer, and thank you for doing that. And then second, we have Pamela Hutchinson. Pamela is the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion for Bloomberg. Pamela is well known throughout diversity and inclusion circles around the world. She was one of the first ever diversity and inclusion professionals I met in my career. I think like the early 2000s, Pamela, I mean, you've been in this space and you've been steadfast around your focus on diversity and inclusion in ways that many of us couldn't mirror if we wanted to. But just wonderful accolades, member of the Executive Leadership Council, top 15 part-time Powerless, Powerless 100. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Employers Board of the Global Institute of Women's Leadership at King's College. Thank you, Pamela, for joining us. I'm really excited to get into the conversation with you. I have to be, this is a bit, I have to be honest here. My dear friend, though actually I can say that about most of you, almost all of you, Arlene Isaacs-Lowe, who's the Global Head of Social Corporate Responsibility at Moody's Corporation, but also the president of Moody's Foundation. Just a steadfast campaigner for ensuring that business does the right thing. And I remember us having conversations very early on in her role as the Global Head of Corporate Social Responsibility, and her kind of commitment to change the world around how businesses operate and how they contribute to society. Also, a previous board member of the Executive Leadership Council on the board of Howard Business School. The woman is everywhere. So Arlene, welcome. Thank you for being here with us today and look forward to the conversation. And then last but not least, she's kind of, sometimes I call her the yin to my yang in a lot of cases. We're kind of attached in a lot of ways and through a lot of different projects that we work on, is Jude Kelly, CBE. Jude is the founder and director of the WOW Foundation in London. An amazing, amazing advocate for women and girls around the world. The movement that she has created around, you can see the WOW symbol. She tried to take it out before we started. We were like, put the WOW symbol back. She just is an amazing campaigner for women and girls. If you don't know the WOW Foundation, please go and look at it. There's a huge festival coming virtually, which we're really excited about. Previous artistic director for the South Bank Centre in London, founding director of the West Yorkshire Playhouse. This is a woman of the arts. She is the woman of the arts for me in any way. And what she will not tell you, because she's so humble, but I have to say this because it blows my mind every time. She is also the recipient of no less than 22, maybe now, doctoral degrees, honorary doctoral degrees. I'm just really pleased to have you all, and I'm grateful for your time. But let's jump in, because we have lots to talk about. I'm going to start with Arlene. We're going to have a really interesting conversation. Arlene, you are really highly regarded in CSR spaces around having your fingers on the pulse, as I kind of talked about earlier, relating to the value of CSR to business and how purpose really should be at the center. And your CSR focus, I know they're kind of the three pillars. We've talked about these. I know them now almost off the top of my head, but I'm going to read them to make sure I get them right. Your CSR focus is
Good.
empowering people financially, activating an environmentally sustainable future, and helping young people to reach their potential. How hard or easy is it to maintain focus on these kind of pillars during such a crisis?
Well, India, first of all, thank you for having me as part of the discussion. I am thrilled to be talking about purpose-driven leadership and thrilled to be part of this panel. But actually, I want to just step back a bit in regards to my journey in corporate social responsibility. I've had a career in finance for quite a while, and it was actually during my tenure in Europe that it became evident that this aspect of CSR or ESG was going to really be transformational in terms of how broader stakeholders thought about companies, and I wanted to be a part of that. And so in 2017, what we decided to do was to have a clear, consistent, and authentic message between what Moody's Corporation stood for in the context of what we do and the value we bring to the capital markets, and align that with our societal engagement or corporate citizenship, but do so in a way that was global in approach and also was intersected with the business. Because what we were finding is that it was important to have an authentic and consistent message around everything you do that's outward facing. And so based on that, we came up with these three pillars because it really sort of allowed us to have the greatest amount of impact in these three areas because we have a level of expertise in the context of economic equity by providing knowledge and resources. And we have a significant ESG evaluation business, so that aligns with our environmental focus nicely. And then as everyone is concerned about pipeline development, we knew it was important to focus on our young people. So fast forward to the pandemic. And I have to say that I have never been more proud to work at this company, and I have been here for 21 years. But our response to COVID-19, one, crystallized our philosophical approach to corporate social responsibility, and it really reiterated that the pillars that we chose are appropriate in the context of what we do. And so it was not at all hard to continue to focus on those pillars during the pandemic. So a little bit about our response. First and foremost was to address the humanitarian needs. And so we made some significant contributions to organizations that were seeking to reduce food insecurity, as well as bolster the health systems around the world so we could get a solution to COVID-19 as soon as possible. But then we also thought about, what we're going to be sort of some of the more medium and longer term impact of the pandemic, and we focused on the economic aspect of it. And so our focus is on helping to drive economic recovery as soon as possible. So thinking about small businesses, our research has indicated, and it's been reiterated through many other well-known organizations, that small businesses are really the significant driver of GDP, as well as job growth in developed and emerging economies. And so helping them to survive through the pandemic is going to be crucial to our ability to recover as quickly as possible. And so we're actually doubling down on that aspect. The nonprofit partners that we are committed to, we have shifted funding and increased funding to ensure that they can survive during the pandemic. But we are not only doing that in the context of our financial contributions, we're also providing a lot of pro bono support to help them transition their programming to virtual delivery. We are helping them with cash flow management. We are training them on how best to apply and be successful in getting some of the stimulus money that's available globally. And so our employees are excited about being able to do something impactful using their skills and expertise. We also know that educational systems are going to be terribly disrupted. And so we're helping our nonprofit partners there on virtual delivery. One of the other things that we're doing is helping them to reposition their messaging to avail themselves of more diversified funding. So that's sort of on the philanthropic and employee engagement side. But what I'm really, really excited about is the products and services that we've been delivering to the market. And we're doing that free of cost. So making our research and webinars available for free. We've enhanced our products to ensure lending platforms can facilitate distribution of funding from stimulus, and particularly proud of our innovation on developing a product that helps to mitigate the risk in supply chains of hospitals. And we did that in a matter of days. So this has allowed us to really crystallize what corporate social responsibility means for Moody's.
Wonderful. I mean, that's, it's, I think one of the things that came up in the last panel that we had was that, for big business particularly, charging people fees for things that, right now they need, in some ways is not the way to go. Because where you have the capability, providing a service to people and helping to support people through the crisis is what people will remember. Right. And that's all about purpose. And, so you will see some businesses who are kind of fee charging for things and others that aren't. And I'd be willing to bet that the ones who make it through the other side, in a way that folks remember, are going to be the ones who help support people through the crisis, as opposed to trying to profit from it. And, profit's okay. We all have to make a living. So that's not the point. It is about providing where you can. So thank you for that, Arlene. We'll talk about more of that for sure as we go through the panel. But I'm going to move to Jude. Jude, WOW's mission is the amplification of the voices of women and girls around the world. So this is a couple-part question, which I know you're used to me asking because I usually have 10 in one go. First, kind of what drives you from a purpose perspective to continue to lead the movement as you have and to kind of put yourself out there and selflessly, I will say it that. And the other thing is around, the taboos and stigma around women and girls and the things that are happening for women and girls around the world that aren't as visible, that people don't often see, but are the indicators that we really have to watch to ensure that, from an economic perspective, from a health perspective, from a whole bunch of perspectives, a number of different things, that we ensure that women and girls don't fall even further behind. So can we talk a little bit about what can and should be done in your mind, and especially around the taboos and stigmas that women are seeing and facing?
Okay, so first of all, thanks for having me. It's great. It's great to be with such fantastic people. I started the WOW Women in the World Festival because I was very aware that I had been the product of other people, not just women, but mainly women, fighting for rights that I could then enjoy. The right to have a job, the right to have some of my dreams realized, the right to be able to choose whether I had a child or not, the right to have equal pay, although we still don't have it, the right to be protected from violence, although we still aren't. Women have fought for years to get rights which I enjoy. And I became very aware as somebody who had realized many of my dreams, even though I come from a very modest background in the north of England, that actually it was up to me to make sure that I put my shoulder to the wheel for everybody else who, for whatever reason, in whatever part of the world, whatever cultural background, whatever social circumstance, they weren't able to access even the rights that I've now got. But I also wanted to come clean with other women and say, actually, just because you live in the global north and just because you're white like me doesn't excuse you from having to take on the battles of all other people who are your fellow humans. And part of that is admitting that actually we still don't know how to solve many of the issues around gender-based systemic injustice. And I think that, the more I have understood about gender-based injustice, the more I have been able to find my way towards being re-educated about injustices that other people live with all the time. So I am white, but I have been re-educated to understand how my whiteness actually is a problem unless I see it as something which I'm going to put my power towards in terms of helping people of colour. My sister was disabled, she died of disability. I was able to see very clearly how she was less legitimate in terms of rights. And on and on and on. I think that I have become more and more driven, actually, to think about how purpose changes the way that we see ourselves together as humans, and how tantalizing a future is that has more and more equality hard built into the way that our systems are made. Because we have, sure enough, a more exciting world than probably existed 200 years ago. And so that just makes me fired up to think, well, what's the world we could advance towards? With regards to the impact of COVID, I mean, one of the things that I think is the most fearful of all emergencies, actually, is that it's either a moment of survival of the fittest, or it's a moment of the emerging of new possible futures and possible practice. And it could be either, and it could go either way. And it's unlikely to be a simple result. But I think for certain, I am concerned that the gender bias of not the pandemic doesn't care who it strikes in theory, but what it exposes is deep injustices and deep levels of privilege and poverty within society. So women are mainly on the front line as nurses. They are mainly on the front line in care homes. They are mainly at home trying to deal with homeschooling at the same time as dealing with holding on a job, or maybe even two jobs, or knowing already they've lost their job. At the same time, if they're lucky to have a kind of positive household, then that's enough to be going on with. But they're also more likely to be in a situation as well where they have a intimate partner violence, coercive behaviour, etc. So there's a huge range of things that women are always dealing with, but under these circumstances, they're dealing with it more. The assumption that homeschooling will allow all children to have equal access to education in itself is not true. But if you're a child of a family with only one device, the hierarchy of needs is it's likely to go to be used by, first of all, the man for his job, if he needs a device, and secondly, probably to the boy for his games. And so the girl accessing a device to be able to do homeschooling is really far down the pecking order. And then there's all sorts of other things about, around the world. If a girl is held back from school, and if her economic viability is seen to be less in a world where economic shrinkage starts happening, the boy's education will be favoured. If a girl is, part of economic survival, she may well be married off suddenly in a way that she wouldn't have been in more economic good times. So, the implications of gender in all of this, when they're giving out food parcels, they very rarely remember that they have to give out sanitary products. They very rarely remember that actually, women who are pregnant are going to have to access medical help in a way that actually we've suddenly pulled the plug on for lots. So, I mean, I could go on. In some respect, it's a grim picture. However, the positive side of it is that it's made girls and women be more vocal about the problem, be more vocal about the sudden invisibility. And it's made women leaders, particularly those who are running countries like New Zealand, say, actually, there are more feminized ways of thinking about power. We can be looking at this as an opportunity to discuss climate change. We can be looking at it as an opportunity to discuss social justice. That's not just the prerogative of women, of course, but there is a kind of, I think there is a binary going on between a macho leadership style, as I'll fight it on the, whatever, and then another style which says, actually, we need to be consensual and imaginative and mutually intelligent about all of this. And that is kind of essentially what inclusion is. Inclusion is not, I'm powerful and include some other people. Inclusion is, what will it be like if we're not all together with our mutual intelligences and experiences? That's the one we've got to go for.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jude. That's fantastic. And, I have to put my hands up for gender diversity on this panel. Sorry about that, Stephen. We're working on it. but no, it is such an emotive topic for us. And the impact, the potential impact to women and girls around the world is so high. And so, thank you for continuing to kind of to bang on about that in all kinds of places. But please check the Wow Foundation's website for the festival that's coming up at the end of June, because I think, we all want to be engaged and involved in that.
Yeah, and I do just want to say that festival, which travels the whole world in 24 hours, it is a coincidence, but it's a very powerful coincidence that both Bloomberg and Moody's are actually supporting that festival. So,
That was not planned.
and
But yay,
as with
yay, Bloomberg and Moody's. And if any of you are watching from other companies, get your companies on sponsoring it too. That's what I have to say about that. These efforts are hugely important, and WOW is a great platform for it. So Pamela, I'd like to kind of talk to you. I mean, being one of the sage people in the world, truly, in the D&I space, and just with all your experience, I want to kind of talk about this crisis as it related to the last one, because when we were talking about the content for this particular conversation and talking about the importance of companies doubling down on D&I, on CSR, and on learning and development. We were trying to think about what was different in the 2008 crisis versus this one. And one of the things that really kind of struck me was that, in 2008, folks were retrenching, like D&I, the money for D&I and CSR that wasn't kind of alive as much in the same way. It was still there, but not in the same way. People pulled money back. They didn't invest. So what are you seeing differently this time, first? And then second, at Bloomberg, there's so much work that you guys do in this space with like your gender index and a whole bunch of other things. How are we leveraging that for the crisis, or can we leverage some of those kind of data points as we think about what we need to do next?
No, absolutely. And thank you again for inviting me to join this panel. I think prior to 2008, D&I was seen very much as a nice to have. I think the business case for diversity and inclusion wasn't as clear, and it wasn't as firmly established. And so when the crash hit, I think it was inevitable that organizations would either slow down their efforts or, worse still, disband them. However, I think, the world has changed significantly since 2008. And, in 2014, we had probably one of the most notable pieces of research around the business case for D&I with McKinsey's Why Diversity Matters, which showed that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity would outperform those in the bottom quartile for gender diversity by 15%, and actually perhaps more incredibly, those organisations in the top quartile for ethnic diversity would outperform those in the bottom quartile for ethnic diversity by a whopping 35%. And I think that piece of research went quite a long way to helping organisations to understand why this was important for them. However, I think the data is one piece, but I do think there are some other things that have probably had an even bigger impact on where organisations are now vis-a-vis diversity and inclusion. And I think those are social media, public opinion, legislation, CSR, and they've had massive impacts. And I'll sort of go through some examples of how I've seen that play out over the years. It wasn't that long ago, in 2016, that the UK left the EU and Donald Trump was elected. And both of those two situations fundamentally change the narrative around diversity, inclusion, political correctness, community. And in the case of Donald Trump, his election had massive ramifications around the globe. We saw people taking to the streets in protest and in solidarity around equality. Coupled with that, we had the advent of the hashtags. Hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Me Too, hashtag I Can't Breathe. There are many, many more of them. And people around the world have started to galvanize together collectively in global social movements. And then, of course, we can't forget that there's been quite a lot of change legislatively around the world too, from India to Ireland to Saudi Arabia, giving rights to once marginalised groups. And I'm sure that will continue to exist. And also, let's not forget that organizations are taking into account ESG, or environmental, social, and governance considerations. They're becoming increasingly important for organizations and for investors who are now deciding where to place their money, where to invest their money. And they're looking for organizations that share the same values that they do. And they're using those organizations to determine where to put their money. So ESG has become incredibly important. You mentioned our own Bloomberg Gender Equality Index, which tracks the financial performance of companies leading in gender diversity. And the Gender Equality Index has triggered increasing interest on our social metrics and how they potentially impact investment decisions. So it's becoming more and more important. I think what's also interesting from the Gender Equality Index perspective is that we're seeing that those firms that are in the index are appearing to be less volatile in periods of sound economies. So it'll be really interesting to see post-COVID whether those organisations fare better. I suspect they probably will. Year on year, since we launched the Gender Equality Index, and we launched it in 2016, we've also seen an increase in organisations clamouring to get onto the index. We're seeing great representation across industry, across country, and across region. Companies are increasingly keen to show what they're doing on gender diversity. They're keen to benchmark themselves against others, and they want to also show exactly what they're doing, particularly given that they know that investors are interested in these social measures. This leads me, I guess, to reputational risk, and it can have a massive repercussion in the D&I space. And social media has had a massive impact on fueling that. I was trying to recall some examples this morning, and a few things that came to mind. So let's, the Sultan of Brunei, his decision to implement stoning for the LGBT community, almost overnight, the world united to boycott his hotels. The impact was swift. And of course, he had to pull back from his policy. And there are lots of other examples. We've had Gucci and their blackface. We've had Benetton and their Coolest Monkey t-shirt. We've had Dove, their campaign, which turned a black woman into a white woman, and many, many more. Apologies from these organisations are almost instantaneous. They know the impact. Once it gets onto social media, that is it. They are dead in the water. And so they respond very quickly. These things can hit the bottom line incredibly fast, and organisations know that. And so they care very much about how they are perceived in the marketplace. Accountability also has a key role to play here in engaging businesses around D&I. If we think about the UK, for example, we introduced the mandatory gender pay audit not that long ago, a few years ago, and hot on its heels, we hope to see the ethnicity pay gap too. Holding organisations accountable for D&I is important because you're shining a light on those that care about this and those that don't. And again, reputations absolutely critical here. It was really interesting to me, literally days after the first gender pay gap audit took place in the UK, I was, and I am not kidding, for several months, once a week on average, I was getting phone calls from headhunters, whilst organisations realised that those that were doing nothing in this space were very exposed and they needed to build their diversity teams. And then last year, I think quite surprising for me, it was, I think, around August of last year, 200 CEOs of large American corporations came together, and they stated that shareholder value is no longer their main objective. Well, blow me down, and committing instead to a number of initiatives, including, and I quote, "We will foster diversity and inclusion, dignity and respect." The pressures that they are getting as large organisations externally in terms of what the public think, what young people think, what is being said on social media is having massive, massive repercussions. let's be really clear now. We're in a very, very different space to where we were in 2008. We, both socially and politically, employees are expecting much, much more from their employers, and employers are definitely being held to a much higher standard. The reality is there's still so much more that we all need to be doing. But from what I'm seeing right now across industry and the conversations that I'm having with my peers is that companies are doubling down on their efforts right now. There is not going back to what we did in 2008 where we're drawing money. We're definitely doubling down, or at the very least maintaining the status quo, because frankly, the stakes are much higher now than they were in 2008.
Absolutely. That's for sure. And you know what's really interesting is I was kind of listening to this, and it's been this way for a very long time, and now kind of not being bound by corporate rules because I'm on my own. I can kind of say some of this. But one of the things that was really interesting for me as an example of some of that is I remember the firm that I was at in 2000, I guess 2000, maybe 99, 2000, when kind of DNI kicked off. They talked about how they were kicking off this diversity and inclusion function, and that there were these 5 pillars. I think at that time it was gender, ethnicity, disability, age, and I'm not sure what else. Maybe there was a fifth. But in any event, it was really interesting because I was really excited about it. And I remember that when I first started my career in banking in 1990, and I was at JP Morgan. Sorry, I wasn't. I was at Morgan Stanley at the time. Excuse me. And this was not a. This is. I'm not going to say anything untoward here. But there were a group of Black analysts, and we had this email group, and everybody was really afraid to have this group because we were all Black people together, and we didn't want people to think that we were congregating, right? And it was a really interesting thing to see the evolution now. But fast forward to Deutsche Bank, I was so excited. I should have said their name. I was so excited when they launched this whole thing. But I think with all firms, and this is not unique to them, the conversations about race and ethnicity have been so behind the curve, as opposed to the ones about gender. Gender has always kind of led everything, and I'm really happy that that's the case. But because I am a woman, but I'm also a Black woman, and so there's a part of it, and it's equal for me. It's not one or the other. I'm both, and so that intersectional India has always been really frustrated by the conversations about race in this. And I think when we think about purpose and when we think about organizations that really address purpose, like you really can't ignore that any longer either. Because the demographics of the world are changing, and if you look at, and I'll stop, I'm going to go to Stephen because I want to hear everything he has to say. But if you go and look at the website for this summit, it is extremely diverse. It is one of the most diverse conferences or summits I've ever seen. And I did that on purpose when we were inviting people, because leadership comes in lots of different shapes, sizes, forms, and whatever it might be. And I wanted people to be able to look at one page and see a diverse slate of leaders who are going to be the folks who actually help lead us out of this crisis. And so I think, I really challenge businesses, for those of you who are watching, go back to your companies and let's have those conversations. They're hard, but we have to. So I'm going to move on to Stephen. Last but not least, I'm so excited that you're here. It's been a long time, but I'm just watching your trajectory has been nothing short of fantastic. And I mentioned early on that my first introduction to you was by Patrick, your co-author for Made in Britain, and that was, I don't know, what year did you write that book?
2004.
2004. So that was, yeah. So I remember that really clearly, and it was everywhere, and just such an amazing representation of people of color in Britain and the accomplishments that hadn't previously been celebrated in that way. But after that, your trajectory went into the D&I space, and you had lots of fantastic D&I roles. You had your own company around learning and development. And now you're in another significant talent management role for leaders at Philip Morris. So, what's your relationship between the experience? I mean, bringing your whole D&I lens to this. What's your experience? Excuse me, in your experience, what's the relationship between talent management and D&I in corporations, and how can those be used as transformation strategies? Because your big thing is transformation. So I just kind of can we talk a little bit about what that means to you and how you've experienced that in your new role?
Yeah, thank you, India. And again, it's a pleasure to be on this panel with this group here. I think Pamela gave a really great background in terms of DNI and the background to it, and it was predominantly in the past driven by legislation. So I'd say it was more reactive. It was about giving access to prevent harassment and discrimination at work, but also transition to provide equal opportunity. So we can think about it as recruiting talent, but that's as far as it went. And I think we saw a significant shift in the late 90s and the 2000s when we saw a flurry of anti discrimination acts come in. So this was against disability, on religion and faith, and on age. And these had a profound, I'd say they changed the discourse because it was no longer now about only access to the market, but they started to stress the business case much more clearly. So if you can remember in 2006, we had an act on age come in into the UK. They stressed how we shouldn't discriminate on age. But suddenly we were talking about things like the benefits of hiring older workers and retaining older workers in the workforce. So companies like B&Q that did garden furniture and garden centers and DIY, they would run campaigns about how they were attracting older workers, they were retaining them, and they were intended to be more reliable, emotionally intelligent, perhaps, than other workers. But the discourse changed away from just access to the benefit of diverse talent. And then they started linking it as well to the idea of benefits commercially. So we heard about the grey pound or the disabled or the pink pound for the spend of the LGBT community. So it was starting to open up that discourse on the wider side. But still, diversity, as all of us remember, sat within human resources. It was a single person's role. It wasn't integrated into the rest of the business. And I think it was also a McKinsey report. I hate to always put it on McKinsey, but they wrote a significant paper called The War on Talent some 30 years ago now. And what happened was it started the debate about we need to be thinking, how do we compete for the best talent, regardless of age, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, race, etc. So this opened up a whole new area, and I think that took the agenda in the 2000s and the early 21st century. So, for example, I was working at Merrill Lynch, a colleague of very much working with Pamela and other banks, and we had a dearth of women who would become senior directors within the organization. They wouldn't reach your level, India. We had they reach VP level, and then they would trail off. So the first thing that we did to recognize it as a talent issue was to locate it within leadership and talent management. So it wasn't within personnel or employee relations, but it sat within talent management as a function. And it also didn't sit on its own. So I was responsible for inclusion and diversity for their wealth management business. So I sat within a business unit that was chaired by two business leaders. So it wasn't run by HR, it wasn't run by diversity, but it was seen as an imperative which was linked towards the talent goals. So to give you specific examples, we noticed that there was a lack of women who were entering into careers within finance. And part of this was the perception that it only requires a certain number of skills, or the job was very mature, or the culture and the environment was conducive. So we actually partnered with Pamela's bank and with 9 other banks. So we formed an interbank network, and we would meet as heads of diversity, supporting diversity heads once a month to not think about things in isolation, but as an industry as a whole. So one example of an initiative we took was to run an event for head teachers, careers teachers, and schools to bring in them and to really work, and also young women from different schools, to show that careers were much broader when people think of banking. So we had legal, we had IT, we had all the different functions, and we got women speaking who had studied French, who had studied liberal arts, much physics, much more diverse than what you would think if you just thought about a career within the bank. So part of it was educating at a much lower level than starting at the top. Also, we started to work on retention. We noticed a lot of our talent would not return after maternity. And part of that was our responsibility as employers. So putting into place things that made it much easier to onboard again. So, for example, having maternity coaching, keep in touch days, and making it much more responsible for the manager to ensure that person could come back to an equal level role or a high level role, not to for the career path to drop off. So these were significant links to the talent agenda in recruitment and retention. In terms of development, a lot of research and focus has been done. And I point to an article that your viewers may be interested by Zenta Folkman. It was published last summer by Harvard Business Review. And they looked at thousands of 360s, and they're on different capabilities, leadership capabilities for success. And women scored higher than men in 17 out of the 19 capabilities. And so it wasn't a question that women have less capability than men. It's not a question of competency. It's a question of, are they given the right opportunity? And their research showed that women aren't confident about their own abilities or in stating their own abilities compared to men till their mid 40s. So this is a question not of competence, but it's a question where men are overconfident in their abilities, where women be more realistic with their abilities and more self-effacing. So a really great guy who was the CEO of Hogan, which does really great talent assessments, he wrote an article, Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders and How to Fix It? So he didn't argue that we need to lower the standards. We need to actually to raise them and to tackle what he called overconfidence in men and have more accurate development and talent processes that make us discern not based on confidence but based on competence. So how we're doing this at PMI is very much we're focused now on changing our performance management. So we're not looking at performance in the yearly conversation with your line manager, but performance that's more balanced between what and how, 50-50, not 80-20. So the energy is more on getting feedback, not just from your manager, but that feedback is constant and it's 360. So it's a significant shift in the talent management process. Another thing is it's okay to have lip service that things will change, but you need to change fundamentals. So PMI became the first company globally, multinational, to be equal salary certified. That means that men and women are paid equal for equal work globally in the company. And that was audited by PwC and extremely powerful, I think, in terms of attracting talent, knowing that you're working for a company that takes this seriously and does something beyond the lip service. So it's a rigorous, it sends out a positive message, I think, to our employees, but also when we're attracting future talent, that they're working in a company that does what it says and that measures it and has it validated externally in a rigorous way. So I think this COVID crisis, as people are saying, will have a significant impact on talent management and I&D in particular. But in the sense that people will become, the talent scope has become broader. No longer when we're working from homes, we can't say location is an important factor because we're now enabling ways of working, accelerating ways of working that will be much more flexible for that workforce. But at the same time, we're very cognizant about the pressures that are faced. For example, women are most likely, more than likely, to disproportionately have home caring responsibilities, have other child caring responsibilities. So the pressures on them to do homeworking will be significantly greater. So we're aware that although COVID has brought on opportunities, we need to be very aware what are the ways it can disadvantage the efforts we have made in inclusion and diversity, and how do we address these very early to make sure that we're not losing the talent that can take our companies, organizations, and society forward.
So that is that, and that is a perfect point. I mean, it kind of ties into Jude's point that she talked about earlier. And I think one of the things, it's such an interesting thing to hear the different strategies that people are employing, right? But as it relates to COVID-19, because I do want to, knowing you all, I kind of want to get to the heart of it and your heart in this space. Because I think the background has been amazing because we really have gone through a number of different things we have to think about first. a number of challenges that you've essentially put out to people by some of the things that you're doing. Like, so business, get on it there. You see Moody's, and they're kind of really, really cognizant. Sierra Strategy. You see Bloomberg, who is all over the space, particularly around indexes and in the work that they do. Philip Morris, gender equality. Wow, kind of out advocating for women and girls across the world. If you needed a charge, listen to what these people in these boxes just said to you around what's happening, but also what's required. And I think, you have to remember what's required. But the part of this I really want to get to with each of you, and we only have a couple of minutes because I really would like to go to questions. For our audience watching, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat box, and our producers will pop them on the screen over to my right. So if you see me looking, it's not because I'm not paying attention, I'm looking at your questions. But I want to ask a heart question for each of you, and I'll ask that you keep it brief so we can answer some of the questions. But just, and this is something I ask myself often when I'm trying to get focused on the heart of something. And that question is, during this crisis, who and what your heart bleeds for? I'd really like to know who and what your heart bleeds for. What is the thing that you're seeing personally that that is challenging you the most around this crisis and the environment in which we're living? Jude, I'll start with you.
Well, absolutely, my heart bleeds for people who have no financial safety net at all, because that level of powerlessness, which is always full of fear, is totally destructive. It's destructive in terms of family life. It's destructive in terms of mental health, and actually that free fall that people can go into of people who were already very vulnerable. I think that my heart goes out for that. But inside that free fall will be the recognition that if you were already from a group that felt marginalized, it will be all the evidence you ever needed that you never mattered, because society hasn't understood that you'd fall first and then reached out and got you. So actually, we were discussing last night on another call, what was compassion, and actually, to be in a privileged situation as I am, and see your society uncaringly let people slip through holes that were of the society's making. I find that kind of unbearable, actually.
Thank you. Arlene?
So my heart bleeds for the entrepreneur is a woman or a person of color, and I've already had significant challenges in terms of access to capital and resources, and had been at a point where they were now advancing and the rug just got pulled out from under them, because everything that they have strived for, and we've seen it, got totally eradicated in a number of weeks. So you think about things like people who are, in emerging markets that were part of a supply chain for a large corporation, and no more demand. So artisans, in terms of retail, I think about hair salons and beauty salons and nail salons, and restaurants, right? And within a matter of weeks, everything that you have worked for has just gone away. And then the other group that I really, my heart bleeds for are the students who have overcome significant challenges to get to a point of graduation, particularly from high school or college. And, we're looking forward to the celebration, and then it just got erased. And we're all trying to sort of celebrate in different ways. But, I was thinking about this more recently. The class of 2020, the graduating class, was born in 2001 in the United States, at a time during 9/11. During their middle school years, they experienced Sandy. So significant events in their lives have always been marked by a disaster. Now, arguably they're going to be incredibly resilient, but there's also the emotional toll of that. Like, when do they get to celebrate? So I think those are the groups that I really think about, and it literally brings tears to my eyes.
And ours and mine as I watch you talk about it. Pamela?
I think there are a number of groups, but I think the two that stick out for me the most is watching, particularly in the US and here in the UK, where I see COVID-19 impacting people in my community the most. There are more deaths amongst Black or people of colour than anyone else. And it's just highlighting the inequalities in society, access to healthcare, poverty. I mean, it for me, it breaks my heart to see that. Particularly here in the UK, minorities are the ones at the front line, and they're dying in much higher proportions than any other ethnic group. So that has been something that's been very close to my heart. I find it incredibly distressing, and I'm curious to know what happens post-COVID in terms of what governments and countries are doing to level the playing field, give increased rights of particularly marginalised groups. The second group that I feel a lot of anxiety and stress about, and actually it's following a little bit from what Arlene said, is my son is 18. This year he was supposed to sit his A-levels. Those A-levels would determine what university he goes to. He has offers from all the universities that he applied to, but these are dependent on the grades he gets. And now somebody sitting somewhere is going to determine what they predict my son's grades are going to be, which will determine what university he goes to. And there has been lots of articles and features about inequalities in education and the impact of having somebody else decide what grades groups of individuals are going to get to go to university. So that concerns me because, bias exists. And I suspect bias will exist in how they determine who gets what grades and who goes to what universities. So, for my son, he's worked incredibly hard, and now someone's going to decide what his grade is. And he hasn't got the opportunity to do that. And I suspect it will impact women and people of colour the most.
Stephen?
Yeah, I believe similar to your panelists, but particularly those who are unemployed and find themselves without employment and without furlough support either, and caught in that middle chasm where maybe they've left a job, haven't yet started a new job, or they've just become self-employed, excited about their new venture, and yet now they've got no customers and cannot survive. So thinking about this population. But I also equally think about when I watch the news in the evening, I often see care workers running homes, for example, and breaking down in tears because they cannot have their safety equipment they need to provide care.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I don't know, for many of the viewers, they probably be experienced if they're in a corporate job, they've been working more hours than traditionally in the past and much harder. But compared to people whose work entails looking after their lives and becomes a life and death matter, that anxiety, that pressure that they're feeling, all our frontline workers, I think my heart is with them. And I think with their families in particular also, who have to support them, never knowing how that person is going to cope with extreme hours and extreme pressure. So I'm thinking of those in particular at this time.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing that. The reason that I really wanted to have that conversation is because, COVID-19 has brought us to this place. And it's why we're having the conversation about purpose-driven leadership, but also the fact that every single person is impacted emotionally by this crisis. And yet, leaders have to go out and lead regardless, and that is not a, these are the jobs that we're paid to do for sure. And in some cases we've all chosen to do them, but that we're paid to do. And I think everybody accepts that responsibility, but there's a humanity to this. There are the things that we each carry as we step into these spaces every single day. And you can't divorce the two. You can't. And when you think about purpose-driven leadership, remembering what's at the core of why we do the things that we do and why we get up every day, and the things that your heart bleeds for are the things that are going to keep us human and keep us sane during this crisis. Remembering, having gratitude for all that we have and remembering the things that people don't, during this crisis and all the things that, we can't control. There's still quite a bit that we can. And that might be, supporting people through this change. But I really just am so grateful to all of you for being so honest and vulnerable in sharing that, because we're human, right? And we can't divorce our work from our humanity. And you all are really living examples of people who do not divorce their work from their humanity every single day and are fighting the fight around ensuring equality across a number of pillars. And so for that, I and I'm sure everybody watching and just people who are in your ether because of the work that you do are tremendously grateful. So please keep fighting the good fight.
So one thing I would also say, India, is I think about how grateful I am and all of us are to be in the position to really have impact at a time like this, right? Because we have these jobs because we care, and it's a great career, but it's also an intersection with the things that you're passionate about, and to be able to, even though it's challenging from day to day, be able to really have impact in a way that is meaningful at this time. There's a level of gratitude that we also have to have, right? Because not everybody is doing what they care about every day, but they've got to do it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
totally agree with that.
I think back to what Jude said about privilege, and she talked about different types of privilege. I think what we're speaking to is also kind of privilege, and this is the debate. Will COVID, let's say a response to COVID is very high unemployment at 20, 30, 40% in some countries, will purpose still be the central driver for many people? Or without our privilege, or will it be survival, or will it be getting their needs met? So how we balance that in having a more realistic discourse, both within organizations, making sure we're providing the necessary, but also recognizing people want to bring their purpose, and they're probably questioning more now than ever. So both aspects being important.
Absolutely. We're at 12:15. I know that we didn't get to lots of questions, and I'm really sorry that we couldn't. I didn't want to pull away from that conversation. What I will say, for those of you who are watching, if you had questions that we weren't able to get to, please go to the website. There is a tab called questions, submit questions. You can submit your questions and we'll try to get them back out to you as we can. I would just like to say thank you, Pamela, Arlene, Jude, and Stephen, for just being here and for sharing your time and yourself during this crisis. I mean, I know we all have lots of competing things that we're focused on, but taking the time to kind of share our experience with people, I think, is a hugely important part of helping others through the crisis who look to us for leadership. So thank you for joining us. This is the last session of the Town Hall Summit. It's been a tremendous 2 days with amazing conversations. We already have the Town Hall Summit for September underway and planning. So go and have a look at the website, stay in touch. If you haven't signed up, please do. Thank you all for joining us. It's been my sincere pleasure to spend time with you, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.